Hey everyone, welcome to M4G Advocacy Media. You're watching the Journey Series podcast. I'm Mark, a brown man with the black glasses, black and white beard, and a blue shirt, um and we're in our home office.
And I'm Crystal. Today I'm wearing a black and white blouse, and I'm a white woman, and I have brown eyes, brown hair, and uh, as he said, we're in our home office.
And thanks for watching us today. We're well into the fourth season of Journeys, and today we're joined by Kristin Secor, who is a travel blogger who's going to talk to us about all she's been through and trying to figure out how to work and develop meaningful work, which supports her through disability. Hi, Kristin.
Hi.
Hi,
How are
So-
you?
I'm good.
Can
So I'm
you tell us Go ahead.
I'm Kristen. I'm a white woman with shoulder length blonde hair and blue eyes, and I am wearing a black shirt today, and I am in my living room.
Great. So, Kristen, you can start by telling us, well, as much of your journey as you'd like to share.
Sure. So I was born with a rare form of muscular dystrophy. It affects my breathing. So I'm on a ventilator. If you hear any breathing noise, that's my machine. I also affects my strength, my endurance, and my balance. And those are the main reasons why I use a wheelchair, is because of the strength, the endurance, and the balance issues. I was born with this disability, but it is slowly progressive. So when I was younger, I had more abilities than I do now. Right now, like I said, I'm on a ventilator and I use a wheelchair whenever I'm outside of my home. And I grew up with that. And despite my physical challenges, I was a mental health counselor for 11 years and absolutely loved my job and loved working with people. But as my disability progressed, I was no longer able to do that profession. And so I had to decide kind of what was next for me and what was the next step. How could I continue to have purpose and meaning in my life? And what would that look like given the new nature of my abilities? And so I kind of looked at my desire to help others, but also my love of travel. And so I decided to combine those two passions, and I became a wheelchair accessible travel blogger.
We're kind of going through the same thing where, you have to find out, you have to kind of assess what you're able to do now, but you're still wanting to help people, and you have to find a new way to be able to do it. And you also have to find the support system that is going to help you do that. And that's an important aspect. I know. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. I would not be able to do what I do now or without the supports that I've created and found. I think that was part of my journey, especially when I decided to make that transition. I knew nothing about travel blogging. I had minored in writing when I was in college. So I had a little kind of skill base to make this transition, but writing can vary depending on what form you're doing. Journalism is very different than travel blogging. And so there's a lot of different types of writing and different ways where you need to right to be seen and be found, so that people can actually find the information that you're providing. And so what I had to do is really look for a coaching system that really taught me this is what you need to know about being a travel blogger. I also had to navigate that whole disability aspect of, how much how much time can I devote to this? How much energy do I have to devote to this? And that's going to change based on the day because, I think that's normal for people with disabilities, especially when you have endurance and energy issues, is that there are going to be some days that are better than others, and you can do more than, some other days. So it's not always consistent. So I kind of had to learn, how to balance all of those things for myself, but then just how to navigate, being disabled and then taking on this new venture.
Right. And yeah, I would also say that it definitely helps to be in contact and the support of other disabled people. Because they understand that concept and don't have that ableist view of, well, that's not the way we do things, and you're not being consistent, and so you're not useful. And but we just get it. We know like each other's struggles because we deal with it ourselves. So that's a really big piece of that puzzle.
Absolutely. And I think I've looked to other accessible travel bloggers for guidance. Some of them are pretty big in the field, so they don't always have time to reach out to provide that support and that guidance. But there's some lesser known ones that I've connected with that have been a great support system, as well as how do we navigate this and how, just understanding kind of where each other are coming from. And I'm really lucky that my coach in this process, while she's not disabled, she had a family member that was disabled. So she kind of understands some of the things, and she's just been so supportive of my goals. And, from an outside perspective of, okay, these are the next steps. And it may not be as fast as other bloggers, depending on, your energy and your needs, but this is kind of a guidance in the direction that ideally will be moving. So I think it's been great to have kind of a combination of people with disabilities and then allies that kind of understand and are still willing to be supportive.
Yeah, for sure.
And being a travel blogger, have you noticed in your travels whether there are other places or other countries where their model of disability support has been something that seems has some benefits over the system we have here?
So I would say some of the European countries have comparable kind of compensation, like the UK, for example, is probably the most close to what we have in the United States, from what I can tell, and just connecting with other travelers that have disabilities and what it's like to live there. Their setup is a little different than ours, but they do try to have it's pretty comparable. I've also been to countries where there are no disability laws and there's no, necessarily rights or access, and what it's like navigating that space. And I couldn't imagine, what it's like. I'm only visiting as a tourist, and that's very different than living there, right? And then having those challenges when there are no accessibility laws or guarantees to make things try to be more inclusive or equal.
Right. Right. It is so difficult when you deal with that. Of course, if you're able-bodied, you I don't always like to use that word because nobody's fully able-bodied, but anyway. Um, but I would say it's so difficult when we already have hurdles and and we can only pick and choose a handful of countries to visit and enjoy it without the hurdles or so many hurdles. We kind of have to plan out every little aspect of everything, even in our, in our daily life at home. So it's a struggle. So we appreciate people like you that are able to talk to other people in different countries and go to other countries and experience those things and let other people know, pass on that information.
Yeah, and I think I'm a pretty stubborn and determined person when it comes to travel because it's something that I want to see and I don't want to miss out on. So I agree, there's a lot of planning that's involved, but I also willingly put myself in a position to go to those countries that are not as accessible and are not as easy as some of the other ones. I just got back from Peru, and Peru, unfortunately, is a country that does not have accessibility laws or guidance. They have shown an interest in becoming more accessible, and thanks to an accessible travel company that has really been advocating for that there. And through their work, like when I was on a tour with them, we went to Machu Picchu. And for those of you who are not familiar with Machu Picchu, it is an old Incan village that is literally built on the side of a mountain that looks like a cliff. So it is very not accessible. There are thousands of stairs. There are thousands of uneven, surfaces and grounds and things like that. But we did that with adapted wheelchairs. And this group had gotten special permission. So while I was there were tourists taking a picture of me in the adapted wheelchair because it's something they had never seen before, right? And they were kind of amazed. Like it wasn't like, oh my God, what are they doing there? It was more of a curiosity of
right.
Isn't that great? And I've never seen something like that. So I want to take a picture and show family members or friends or, whatever. And so for some people, that would make them very uncomfortable to be stared at, to have photos taken of you. And I understand that. I put myself in that position and I don't mind because in a way that advocates for more accessibility. The more you're seen out in public wanting to do these things and letting the government and the tourism board know that there's an interest there and that that there are possibilities there, now they're more willing to talk to that accessible tour provider and they're asking, okay, how can we make this site more accessible? Are there ramps that we can put in place that would go over the stairs to make it a little easier? And how can we respect the historic nature of this site, but also try to make it more inclusive as well?
Right.
And it's important for a lot of those countries that don't have these accessibility laws or anything in place. They're used to a model where they sort of hide people away or keep them at home, because that's all they know. And then the people don't go outside. And then other people who are not disabled come to the conclusion that, well, maybe they can't go outside or maybe they don't want to go outside.
Yeah.
And then this attitude sort of infects everyone, and then it just becomes the norm.
Yeah, and I think that's what I try to fight against. Even if I don't have the opportunities to speak with some of these lawmakers and officials directly, just by being visible and normalizing people with disabilities being in public and traveling and doing things, kind of helps with fight against that narrative that they've created, that, oh, they don't want to do these things or they can't do these things. And it's not that we can't, we can't with the current environment. And if you change the environment, then and become more inclusive, you can find that people with disabilities are very capable of doing more things, and your disability doesn't become as much of a barrier.
Right. And I think it's also important because people who people with disabilities who live in the country are less likely to go out on the limb themselves because they have to wake up there and live there every day, and they're more, if the people in charge in that place are the type to suppress and dismiss and gaslight their own people, it's hard for them to get out there. But you, as somebody who travels, aren't necessarily subject to their laws and their thing they have going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think really to give credit to this tour provider, they are the ones that are advocating day in and day out. And no, they are not disabled, but they are true allies for our community and saying we want to make our country better and we want to be more inclusive. And so we're going to be willing to take up that fight and continue to have these conversations. It's not a one-time situation, it is a process, right? Because sometimes people need convincing, they need to see evidence, they need to see why monetarily this would make sense for them and the benefits of being more inclusive. And so usually those conversations happen over a period of time. And so the fact that this company is really working at having those conversations and advocating to make things more inclusive and to try to provide guidance, on the best ways to do that has been really great.
Need drink? Need drink?
I'm good.
Okay. Were you done?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
No, I just heard.
It's definitely a challenge. It is so nice to see when allies are willing to, or not, I don't want to say willing, but they just want the world to be a better place and be inclusive. And even though it might be uncomfortable for other people, they still stand by, what they are trying to do, and and help the disability community. And we talk a lot about, the things that were put in place by governments and leaders and stuff like that were, let's hide disability away. And so now people are uncomfortable because they never had to experience what it was like having people that talk different, walk different, look different, all these things. But in advocacy work, you talk about a lot that the uncomfortable conversations have to happen in order, and not just the conversations, but the actual doing of things has to happen, even though it's uncomfortable, because that's going to normalize these situations, you know? And,
Absolutely.
yeah,
And I think, you know, sometimes we think we have to start with the government and work down. And I think what Peru is doing is they're working with the tourism boards and hoping that that'll have an impact on the government, right? If
right,
you say, look, we could bring in so much money each year by being more inclusive and changing, if we invest in accessible public transportation, if we invest in, some structural changes, then we could make that back and more because of increased tourism and, other
right.
benefits. I think sometimes that's what the governments need to see from other official organizations
Right.
in order to take that step towards change.
Mhm. So, yeah, we were talking before this about the implication of the different jobs and different things that people, do, that where disability is a lot more prominent than it was before, and more people are being diagnosed. And so people are gonna have to get used to there being a lot more challenges and a lot more people out there that are neurodiverse, and need different things. So yeah, it would be helpful, and the world just is gonna need to revert, or not revert, is going to need to invest in making the world more accessible.
Absolutely. And I think even in America, we have a long way to go to make that happen. I mean, even talking about the workforce, right? That I think we mentioned in our, pre-podcast discussion that they have a very one-sided view of how they define work. And, unless you're working so many hours a week and are guaranteed a specific hourly wage or a salaried rate, then anything outside of that, they don't necessarily have this have a structure in place to recognize that or accommodate that. Because as a travel blogger, I don't get paid a set wage each week. I don't get, a set income, and that's very much dependent on a lot of different factors. So a lot of that they don't know what to do with. They don't know, am I working? Am I, is this a hobby? How do we define this? How do we move forward with this? What does that look like? But in many ways, this non-traditional job is exactly what fits my needs and my abilities, because it allows me to be more flexible. So, I think if we change how we define work and how we can look at that, and we don't just think of a traditional job, I think people with disabilities should be much more successful.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and we talked in the pre-discussion about them about people who make up these systems just being a little more flexible in their definition, instead of trying to make us as people with disabilities or anyone receiving any kind of assistance, instead of trying to make us fit into a mold, change the mold to fit whatever our needs are.
Yeah, yeah. I think you would, if they were being willing and to make that shift in how they define those things, that I think the world would naturally be more inclusive, and you would find that people with disabilities are capable of a lot more when you work with what their needs and abilities are, rather than say, well, you have to do it this way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a balance because and I'm definitely not trying to give them a pass or anything, but it's a bit of a challenge when we need systems need to be able to function at the end of the day to provide people, but there has to be some flexibility there. And I'm certainly not sure how to do that, but we've we both agree that it can be done. It's just somebody people have to be willing to make the effort.
So, for sure, yeah. We have a lot of ideas, but neither one of us are experts at anything except our lived experiences, Um, and through all the people we talk to, we hope and pray that somebody that is an expert is listening and trying to alleviate some of the issues and hearing us and seeing our guests, and are able to empathize and just on a human level seeing a problem and trying to say, oh, okay, that's not gonna work, and being able to realize first, like we talked about, being able to rationalize that I was told the wrong thing about disability and they should be respected on a level playing field with everybody is a hard place to get to. First, you have to get through those hurdles of, all that stuff. And then, once you're able to get to that place, then being able to do what I was saying, that's a hard place to get to, but, we hope that it's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, that's why just being in public and kind of challenging people's ideas of what it means to be disabled and what we're capable of helps to start to change that narrative. I mean, that's one of the benefits of travel for me, other than I just love exploring new places and, finding out new sites to see and things like that. But to be able to be more public and say, okay, this is what someone on a ventilator looks like. We're not always bedridden. Sometimes we are, sometimes we're not. And I can go out and have a fulfilling life, and I can, make a positive impact and do positive things and contribute to our society. And it doesn't just look one way for everyone in a similar circumstance.
Yeah, there was a time in our human history where it was um it was a challenge for society as a whole to be supportive because we didn't have certain things in place. And now there's really not an excuse for that not to happen because we have a lot of things we're capable of now because we have all that learning from the past. We're sort of in a place I mean, not most uh, westernized countries, I guess, or most countries that have reached a certain level in their development have the infrastructure to be more supportive, and there's no reason for them not to be,
Yeah,
other than apathy or laziness.
yeah,
Well, and what I find is now that the supports are in place, right, and we are being more visible, and this you know, whatever that looks like, whether it's neurodivergency, whether it's physical disability, whether it's, you know, something else, people are relating more of, oh yeah, I have a family member, or I know a friend, and I would love to be able to see them do this, and I would love to, you know, be able to just have the world more inclusive. And I find a lot of people are kind of rooting for that, of like, yeah, you go, you do that, you follow your dream kind of situation. And I don't know that maybe they just don't know how to help, right? If they're not disabled, they don't know how they can be supportive, or but they want to be, and they want to see the world more inclusive. There are still the people that are ignorant out there. I've run across those people as well, you know, that feel like we should still be at home and be invisible. But I would say the large majority are supportive, and they just don't know what steps they can take to be an ally and help, you know, promote change.
Right, right. And then imagine living in a world where your family member is disabled, but everything around you is inaccessible. So the insecurity of not knowing how they will do when they get to that place or that event or whatever, even in your own country. And then just them not including you because of, you know, they're unsure of how the event is gonna be, because, you know, that's a drop down kind of thing for, you know, how we feel when we're not included in things. But it's because the world was not set up to be accessible. You know.
And I think even when it is, there's still a lack of information about accessibility that's presented, especially accurate information, right? Because there'll still be restaurants that say, yeah, we're fully accessible. And you get there and there's 3 stairs, and you're like, no, that's not accessible. Well, I mean, I had situations when I was looking to take a bus somewhere, and I asked, is the bus accessible? And they said, yeah, absolutely. And when it got there, they said, well, you can climb stairs, right? And I said, no, I can't. So I think people are still trying to understand that accessibility is different for everyone. There are people with limited mobility that use a wheelchair that can do stairs, but there's a whole ton of people in wheelchairs that can't, and that, you know, one doesn't equal the other. So the word accessibility has so many different meanings and connotations, and some are influenced by culture and our preconceived ideas and, you know, our own experiences. So I think that there's just still a very large lack of information. There may be a venue that is really accessible, but they have no information on their website saying, yeah, we have a free entrance, and we have, you know, accessible bathrooms that can accommodate wheelchairs, and we have, you know, all these services. So it's great that your venue is accessible, but if you're not advertising it as such, then you're still leaving room for people with disabilities to feel excluded, because we don't know whether we're going to be able to make that situation work or not, or our families don't know. So I find there's 2 types of people. There are people that are, I don't know, so I don't want to put my family member or loved one in that situation, or I don't know, but I'm determined to make it work, and we're going to fight like heck to, you know, include you in this situation. So there's just a lot of approaches to how we encounter accessibility and the information that's available.
I think what needs to be considered is, you know, when people have inaccessible things like stairs leading in their to a restaurant, it's not necessary, of course, it's inaccessible to people with disabilities that need to use a ramp or what have you. But it's also inaccessible to a whole host of other people. Maybe maybe they have a stroller, or maybe they just don't have the capability at that moment to get up the stairs for whatever reason.
Right.
They would be helped by that.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating to be invited somewhere, or for the people who were the ones that invited you to it, to be told that the venue is accessible, but their interpretation of the company, their interpretation of being accessible is having a ramp only into the door, but the bathroom is not accessible and the aisles are not accessible at all. And if it may be a store, they might have stuff on the floor, or they might have end caps that are blocking it so it's not accessible. There's so many different scenarios, and that goes for travel as well. Like if you're going to a place and you're expecting there to be, your hope is that the majority of the stores or places you need to go to or hotels are actually accessible. But think about it for disabled people. That's only maybe a quarter of those things that you planned out that are actually easy to access.
Yeah, and what I found, I mean, there's always that fear, right? And what that does is that creates travel anxiety. And it's hard because it's based in reality, right? There are some irrational fears that we have, about flying. For example, what if the plane crashes or whatever? But when you're talking about accessibility, those are very much reality-based fears. What if I show up to a hotel and the room isn't accessible? What do I do? What if I go to a restaurant and have to use the bathroom and they don't have an accessible restroom? What do I do? How do I, these basic needs that I think sometimes people take for granted, of being able to use a restroom when you're out and about traveling and sightseeing and not having to worry about whether there will be one available, right? And so I was just discussing this with my readers yesterday, of how that actually keeps them from traveling and having a quality of life, because of this fear of, am I getting the right information? How are people defining that? How do I feel more confident to be out in public? Like, they see the importance of that. They want to be out in public, traveling and, doing things that add to their quality of life. But this anxiety holds them back, because the reality is not every place is accessible. And so then that becomes a discussion of, how can we change that? How can we still allow you to acknowledge that there's going to be some anxiety, but reduce the likelihood of you encountering inaccessible places or being given the wrong information? And so what I always tell everyone is to not ask, is something accessible? Instead, ask very specific questions. Are there stairs? Is there a bathroom with a door X amount wide so that my wheelchair will fit? Are there grab bars now? Is there any obstacles going down the path to get there? Are there cobblestones? Are there, whatever that need is for you, because all of our needs are different and what we can navigate is different. Ask those specific questions because you're more likely to get better and more accurate information than just using that term, is something accessible?
It would certainly, I was thinking about the different things, like when we plan a trip or something we need to go to, obviously it's like you were saying, an anxiety of, is this gonna be this? Are we going to be able to fulfill what we need to do when we get there? Interviews or whatever, advocacy stuff. Are we going to be up to par in mentally and being able to have a dialogue, and be understandable to the audience? If those things are not in place, then things are inaccessible, and we have to spend that energy trying to figure out how to get around somewhere, then we're not going to be our best. And that's going to take away from our audience and their audience, So there's a whole slew of issues that people don't even have to consider. They're unaware of, and they don't have those experiences, so they kind of push it aside and ignore it. But then there's also the added stress of income. And, when we can do those things and when we can plan special trips or visit people or things like that, and I'm sure, like, and the people you talk to in your blog and your readers and stuff, I'm sure you've had a lot of conversations about that.
Yeah, that's probably one of the things I get asked about the most. And the truth is, when you need accessible travel and adaptive things, if public transportation is not accessible, it forces you to hire private options, which are always more expensive. In the traveling community, we call it the disability tax, because accessible travel is almost always at least twice as expensive as traditional travel. And so you combine that with the fact that some people are on limited incomes. Some people are working, but still, even if you're working, you have a set salary and a set amount that you can sometimes set aside for travel. So a lot of us maybe not able to travel as often as we would like because of that financial piece that we have to consider. And I think for me, that's one of the major reasons why I started organizing wheelchair accessible small group tours. Because the more people you travel with, the more people can share that cost. And so it becomes more attainable. Not always easy. It's still sometimes out of people's price range, but it's something that for a trip I have next year, for example, we're going to Switzerland, and that's an expensive country anyway. So let's just be honest about that. But then I had one of my readers email me and say, hey, we were interested in going to Switzerland. We looked at an accessible travel company, and for the two of us, it was going to cost, like $6,000 for a 1 week trip. And or more than that, and that's a lot of money. And so again, that was per person, that wasn't total, that was per person. And then so what I did is I said, okay, let's try to make this happen. It's a bucket list destination for a lot of people. Let's try to make it more affordable. And so I was able to lower that price by $2,000 per person just by doing a tour in a small group of 10 people rather than just 2 people going on their own. So it's still an expensive trip, but lessening the price by $2,000, that's a whole other trip you could take, or 2 trips depending on where you're going. So like that's a big reduction, and that is the most expensive trip I've ever offered. Most of the tours I organize, I try to keep between $2,000 and $3,000 a person. I think that's more reasonable. Again, that will still be out of some people's price range, and I understand that. But my goal was to make trips more affordable, but then to take the stress out of planning accessible travel. If I can get all that information for you as someone with a disability that understands that people's needs are going to be different and understands what questions to ask and to understand what barriers may be in place so that I can tell you all that information up front and then allow you to decide whether that trip is going to fit your needs or not. That's huge. And that's the 2 biggest reasons why I started doing that. It's a lot of work organizing these tours, but it's something I'm really passionate about because I want to make travel more accessible, both financially and, disability wise for people so that they can travel to those places they've dreamed of.
Right. Yeah, one of my bucket list countries, there's several, a couple, but Scotland I could think would be my first, and that's also an expensive place, but just think about the anxieties of things not being accessible here and even thinking about going abroad. And then if we can also talk about, the difficulty getting a passport for disability, and the steps you have to take to have that done. And, at the moment, I am trying to get mine. I've never had one. And it's ridiculous because normally you can take a picture and submit it online, and they tell you how to do it and stuff like that, but they're telling me now, no, that's not going to work. You have to go somewhere and have it done professionally and send it to us that way. So there's just all these red tape and steps. Have you experienced that?
So it's a little easier for me. Yes, I did have to go somewhere to get my picture taken for my passport, but then I was able to print off the form at home and then mail it in from home. So that part was easier. The only part that required me to go somewhere was the photo. But then you have to be careful of where you go. Usually drugstores like CVS will do passport photos, but they don't always get them right. They don't always, I don't know how well they're trained in taking them. So what I always suggest, if possible, if you have a government, like go to the post office. Post offices are a government building, so typically they are accessible, to people with disabilities, and they know exactly what types of photos need to be taken and what the criteria are because they're a fellow government agency. Unfortunately, not all passport offices offer passport photos. So you have to look at if there's a post office in your area that offers that service. But if you have that option, I would say that's more accessible and more likely to actually happen and be the right photo. So then you don't have to go through that process all over again.
Thank you for that information.
Yeah, thank you.
That's
That was
helpful.
helpful.
Well, not for only me, but for our audience and anybody else who needs it.
I was thinking of, we want to empower people who maybe uh have a disability and uh let's say are subject to attitudes around them that have led them to believe that they can't do what they want to do with, let's say they want to travel, that they can't go here and they can't go there because of X, Y, and Z reason, right? And maybe you can share some places that you've been or some destinations that you've been to that, and maybe some adventures that you've been on that weren't necessarily accessible, but you were able to navigate them nonetheless.
Absolutely. So if someone listening is in that position, I think one is really important to surround yourself with other voices on the other side of the fence, right? You're going to get the negative voices of you can't do this and you can't go there. Look for disability support groups online. There's a ton of accessible Facebook groups, accessible travel groups where you can ask questions to determine if a destination is going to meet your needs or to get suggestions. I just started an accessible Facebook group myself for travelers who want to do this. And that's one of my goals, is to challenge people's ideas of whether a destination is going to fit for them or not, because there is so much negativity of, oh, I'm never going to be able to go to Peru and Machu Picchu, or I'm never going to be able to go to this destination or that destination. And while it's not going to, I have not found a destination that is 100% accessible for 100% of people, just because we all have different needs and abilities. However, if we can challenge those thoughts, either that are from other people or within ourselves, about what is possible, and actually take the moment to look into, is this going to fit my needs or not, then that is so much more empowering than just making the assumption of I'm not going to be able to do that. I think Peru, for me, from my abilities, was manageable, and I was able to go to Machu Picchu and a lot of other amazing destinations, even with their challenges, because of the accessible tour group that I used. But even like in September, I'm going to Africa and I'm going on safari and I'm doing a gorilla trek. So I think that really looking into being 100% honest with yourself about what your abilities are, what your needs are, and then using that information to look into what's out there will help you decide and help maybe open the planet a little bit more of places that you might not have thought possible. And that has been one of my goals since the beginning of starting the travel blog, is I want to help people look at what may be possible. One of the people that is coming with me to Africa, because that's another small group tour that I'm running, is on a ventilator like myself, and they didn't know if they'd ever be able to travel on a ventilator. And so what I've been able to do is not only show them what I've been able to do through my travel, but really coach them in a way. Like when they signed up for the trip, my promise to them is I'm not going to just say, okay, you're coming, good, figure this out on your own. That's not my style. So I set up Zoom calls with them and I said, okay, what are your concerns? How do you talk to the airline about traveling on a ventilator? And these are the steps you need to take, make sure your doctor thinks it's safe for you to travel in your current condition. And then this is the conversation to have. These are the questions to ask, because I want people to feel more empowered to travel to places and do things that maybe they didn't think possible. And maybe it's try, and maybe you try and you fail, and maybe it doesn't work out as planned, but you try. And then you learn stuff along the way. When I started traveling as I became more disabled, it didn't go perfectly 100%. I've had all those instances that we fear. I showed up to a hotel and they said, yeah, we give your room away, or it's hearing accessible, not mobility accessible. And so I learned a lot along the way. I learned what my rights are. I learned how to advocate for myself and how to talk to people, you know, when that happens, so that they actually want to help you and they don't just ignore you because you're so angry at them. You know, like, how to balance those emotions and how do you work through that? And I think there's so much to learn along the way. That's one of the reasons I started the Facebook group as well. Because I just wanted to be able to offer that advice and that support to people. So if you're in a position where someone is telling you you can't, without looking into things, without, you know, they're just making that assumption, I would say make sure you have support of people that are going to listen to you and help you research and look into things and help give you that support and that tips, whether it's me or whether it's someone else, because, you know, there's a lot of options out there. I think just have that support and do your research and find out what is possible for you, because I guarantee there's probably some place that's going to meet your needs that you can travel to and do that successfully.
Right.
No.
No. This was a really good episode. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And if any of you want to check out the blog, it's worldonwheelsblog.com. You can find me on Facebook at World on Wheels blog, and then my Facebook group is Accessible Explorers on Facebook. So if you search that, you'll be able to find it. You're welcome to join and get those tips and that support, and help you travel to those places you want to go.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Kristin.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for watching, guys. And don't forget to encourage, educate, and empower someone today. Bye.
Bye.